Go. All right, welcome back to Fantasy Labs. I am your host, Bryan. I'm joined, as always, by Colin Davy and Peter Jennings, aka Ram 88. We're back here reviewing our lineups from the PGA 30K Eagle. This is a 3-entry max tournament. I think this is part 5. I think we've done 4 videos so far, and this is just a running video that we do where we throw in 3 lineups to this 3-entry max tournament, and then we talk about our process and give each other a little flack about our lineups. I will start with mine. As you can see here, I did cash 2 of my 3, got up to 48th in the highest one, which I think paid out $80. So that was pretty good. So I'm trying to catch up to Colin here. 2 of my 3 lineups, I had 6 through. I did have sort of a frustrating let's see here. Yeah, Peter Uline had this MDF here as well. But yeah, so I thought this was a pretty good lineup. I think JB Holmes was maybe the guy that brought me down here. But Rafa, Reavie, and Schwartzel, as well as Horschel, all in the top 5. And Molinari was sort of my chalk guy. But yeah, I mean, this is sort of tough. I don't really know exactly what I would change here. And I guess it shows that getting first place is pretty hard. Colin, what are your thoughts on some of my lineups here?
So I have to be a little bit sour grapes, I guess, this week because I'm going to say that Schwartzel's probably my least favorite pick, and it happened to work out. I recognize that sounds super well, it worked out, so what complaint is there? Mm-hmm. But Schwartzel, if you look at his price tag, yeah, he was a sub 8K who I knew was going to be over 20% owned. Yeah. My general view is you try to fade high ownership, and he happened to get second, which made it a really a little bit on the chalky or heavy week. I get it that he had great line movement afterwards, but I'm of the school that there's no once you get above 20% ownership for anyone above 8,000, they're an auto fade. I'm open to interpretation if that's wrong. But Schwartzel's probably my least favorite pick there. I get Molinari. I had him as the top option there. I had him as a little bit too high ownership for my tastes, but I get it. I could fit him in a couple spots just because his equity was so high there. But if we go through the rest of the lineups, there's a bunch of names in there. Obviously, I'm going to like Reavie. I thought Horschel was really good. But yeah, I thought Schwartzel was he was a fade for me this week. Just on ownership alone. Yep. But I reserve the right to clearly it worked out, so I don't know how much room I have, but I still think Schwartzel was a fade.
Yeah, Pete had mentioned this before that if you could get a good combination of getting the chalky guys that you really, really believe in with some low-owned guys. So I thought that fading Ricky, that was my one move. We're always team fade Ricky with his probably high ownership in that price tag. I thought going Molinari, and even if I got Schwartzel, I could get in some of these lower guys. Horschel was a play that I had mentioned last week, Colin. It was sort of the same thing as the Stanley play, whereas a guy who was sort of chalk a week before and put up a dud, it was going to go overlooked, and he was single-digit ownership. What were your thoughts on Schwartzel, Pete?
Well, I played him not in this tournament, but I did play him. Interesting. I had a long conversation with a buddy who does really well in DFS golf. He has a line movement and really emphasizes just scoring and a lot of the lines. And he thought Schwartzel was the best play of the whole weekend. So that was interesting. He liked Schwartzel as the number 1 overall play. We actually got into an extensive argument about JB Holmes versus Uline. You'll see my lineups. I was all in on Uline. He thought JB Holmes was a better play. My argument that he wasn't was course fit was bad for JB. Obviously, he's a little more of a variance golfer. And I was looking at it. He's not great on the par 4s in terms of overall scoring, but he is top 10 in birdie making on par 4s. So I looked into it. He's basically in the bottom 20% in terms of bogeys made overall on the PGA Tour, but he is a perfect DraftKings golfer because he's constantly making birdies. So that was a really interesting one. And again, more of his argument was, at the end of the day, when the markets are closing, he's going to lean on the markets, and he loved JB Holmes and he loved Schwartzel. So had some interesting debates around that. Definitely like your teams. A lot of similar guys to me. Uline cost me easily 5 figures on the weekend with that MDF. The most frustrating part was he missed a 4-foot putt on Friday. That would have eliminated 16 golfers going into Saturday. So he makes that. He sticks around for Sunday, and who knows what happens. But
42.9%. So
yeah, I get that's the other reason why. Like, I mean, forget how he did. Like, Uline is actually arguably my number one fade because I thought his ownership would be even higher than Schwartzel.
Right.
And I think like if you knew like going in 43%, like I mean, I have to imagine like no one has a crystal ball.
No one thought 43%.
I never thought. I thought he was going to be like 15 to 20. I mean, yeah, I know he's been great in terms of like his game log, but he plays a lot of Euro stuff, and he's not a name that like the average person knows. But that clearly was
I don't know. I just thought that like Schwartzel and Uline's ownership was just going to be too high. I mean, like that is like it is the trickiest balance to like trade off equity versus ownership. But just I lean so heavily ownership over equity because it's far more stable quantity and easier to predict that.
Especially with last week's field. Yeah. Yeah.
Uline and Schwartzel were fades for me. I don't know. Maybe I got to look deeper into it to say like maybe there is enough equity you can get to overwhelm ownership. But yeah,
that's going to be the constant debate. But I'm with you for the most part with ownership there for sure.
Cool. All right, Colin, let's see your lineups.
All right, what do we got? Spoiler alert, not nearly as good as Bryan's. Put up a big offer. So, interestingly enough, for the top end, I actually ended up going Ricky in pretty much all of my lineups because I thought it would be a case where there was such high buzz around Molinari and Phil that I thought they would take up most of the ownership, and Ricky would be a case of kind of like people aren't willing to pay up for him because there are cheaper options on the board. So, in that sense, he was right. He was lower owned than Molinari and Phil. So in that respect, I think he did it fine. The one I'm kicking myself on, if I had gotten ownership better, Brooks Koepka was only 15% in the dog leg. And that one was probably the most surprising ownership for me. Had I known, I probably would have gone Koepka instead of Fowler in pretty much all my lineups. So I need to figure out why I was so off on ownership there. But kind of my order of priorities for a lot of these were actually the guy that was in all my lineups this weekend was Chad Campbell. I thought he had fantastic
course history.
The best history to boot. I thought he would have been overlooked. I really liked his ownership was exactly where I thought it would be. And he put up a good finish, so I got that right. Daniel Berger was another case where I thought he'd actually be sub 20. He was a little bit higher, but he won, so it worked out. So it was kind of frustrating to load up heavily on Berger and Campbell for most of the lineups and just like bank everywhere else. Mostly because I mean, it was a pretty chalky weekend otherwise. If Schwartzel puts up a top 25, maybe a lot more of these cash. But I just like when I'm looking over, like mostly I'm just happy with the low ownership numbers that my lineups are putting up. I did have a couple that were that had zero Ricky, but even then they were cursed with some Russell Henley didn't do too well. I did have a couple 5 out of 6s elsewhere. Daniel Berger really kept a lot of it, but I did like a lot of these low ownership. But yeah, it was pretty much Campbell, Fowler, and Berger were the ones I was heaviest on this weekend. The rest just didn't pan out.
Yeah, Campbell and Kim were the two elite course history guys that definitely were not owned nearly enough. Obviously, it's easy to say that after the result, but really nice picks there. I don't like the Ricky play, even considering I think you're just that's a classic fancy play syndrome FPS for sure with Colin, especially since you don't like him as much. His ownership's always going to be very similar, even to Molinari when he's touted immensely. So
yeah, like Ricky just has a floor, like an ownership floor.
He's just gonna. I mean, he's too much of a name. And yes, the salary discrepancy is going to lead to more people going Molinari, and he was more heavily owned, but it's not going to be like a drastic difference. I think the key if you're really going to focus on ownership, Colin, which you're doing a great job of, I think you should focus more on the lower end guys. I think you can definitely make the argument that, a guy at 30% versus 20% at the top end who has clearly more equity is going to be a better play. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think the high end, it's much harder to gain a lot of leverage just because pretty much all the time, especially in these weaker fields, all these guys are going to be 20% plus. I guess Koepka is the one exception. He ended up 15 to 20% in most spots.
Yeah, it was low.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I think we're just the thing we're agreeing on is you do get some leverage by moving from 30 to 22 from Molinari to Fowler. I think we're just disagreeing on the value of that. I guess I'm still treating it as linearly, more leverage is good. you're saying that, like, I mean, maybe it matters in certain spots. Like, not all leverage is created equal. You can't just, like, add up ownership. That's the way I'm treating it. And, like, maybe that's what I need to go back.
My argument is that at the high end, the equity disparity can be higher. Like the top end guys, there can be a bigger difference in equity. I think the low to mid tier guys, there definitely can be, especially with mispricings. But I think that these guys at the top end are more consistent. And, you're paying a huge premium for Ricky over Molinari, who you said you'd take Molinari straight up in terms of equity. So if you look at the equity to price ratio, I don't see how, that 8% is going to be worth it relative to the equity differential that you have.
Yeah, I think like their equity differential is less than 8%. That's why I'm coming at it.
Okay.
But maybe
even with the price tag, I mean, 12,000 versus 10.5. So basically that's a difference right there of 8% or close to 8% just in terms of the price. So if they're dead even in golfers, like literally the exact same golfer, that's the 8% right off the bat, just in terms of the price. Then you factor in that you said Molinari you think is a top 5 golfer, and I have to imagine in your models you had him weighted, as a better play.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I mean, yeah, we're looking at the exact same thing. It's really just like this is kind of like the fine print that like needs to get looked at if you want to get the level of GPP. So, it's definitely something that I'm going to review this week.
Cool. All right, I will share my screen whenever you're ready, Colin.
All right, technical difficulties. Let's get this out of here. All right.
Sweet. Okay. All right. So I had 3 teams. They all cashed, a lot more chalky than everyone else. Again, I'm definitely going more equity route in general right now, which I know is incorrect. I need to figure this out a little bit better, but I threw in my teams that I had in like the 1,500 and stuff in this tournament. So I need to come up with a strategy to really focus on that, to get better ownership. Here's the main team that I had, was looking really good, was second in the 1,500 going into Sunday, and then just kind of a disaster Sunday round. But
because of Uline?
Yeah, Uline just absolutely destroyed me. And at 43%, it's obviously terrible. But I was heavy on him. I had him on all 3. This is chalk central with the exception of Ches. Stanley, I knew it was going to be chalk, but that ownership was really surprising to me at 36%. I thought he'd be a little bit lower. Yeah. I thought I'd get a lot of leverage on Cabrera-Bello relative to his ownership. I thought Chappell would be higher. So my thought was I'd get the most equity to have 2 leverage guys. Ches wasn't as much leverage as I thought. I think Colin might have had something to do with that, but that was that lineup. So next lineup, this one I did go with a little bit more contrarian stuff. I was surprised Graham McDowell was so heavily owned, but I was all in on Uline and Molinari, and then I sprinkled in Ches again here, Adam Scott, McDowell. Knox ended up being really low owned. Loved that play with that course fit. And then the final team, you can see here, again, it's a lot of the same guys. I just got screwed by Uline again. Everyone made the cut. Happy with Knox's ownership. Cabrera-Bello's ownership I was fine with. Kevin Tway I thought was interesting. I didn't really know. I could see him being 10%. I could see him being 20 to 25. So he was kind of the middling tier there. But yeah, I'm sure Colin hates all the ownership of these guys, but these are teams
the only one that really was like I think Schwartzel and Uline were the worst. I mean, like Stanley's probably a close third actually. But like those are the only ones I thought like, I mean, the high ownership at like the mid to low levels just seems like a clear fade to me. Cause like you said, it's tough to get low ownership at like the higher prices. But like Stanley had some pretty easy pivots there.
I mean, it is crazy. Sure. Like we the only time we ever see 40% plus ownership is like DJ in a weak field, the fact that Uline was 43% is sort of unprecedented.
That is pretty crazy to me. Yeah. I mean, I definitely had him as like high, like projected to be high owned. And that
but like 2025, not 40.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Like, so I think
that's super auto fade.
Right. So all 3 of these lineups had Uline and Molinari, and that's just like you're just starting off as like just so much, you're so similar to the rest of the field. I think I did a decent job differentiating after that, but not great. And in the future, definitely, I'm really going to try to focus on getting a little bit more leverage with some certain guys. I thought the best overall play out of the group was Chad Campbell. I really like that. And Ches, obviously, it's nice to see him do well, across the board for us.
Yeah, we're team Ches here.
definitely Team Ches. But overall, 3 cashes, good weekend. It would have been a great weekend. I was looking at 400, 500% ROI until Uline had the MDF, but it is what it is.
And we got the U.S. Open this week. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Definitely check out the U.S. Open pod. It should be in your feed if you have not listened to that yet, and all of the content on Fantasy Labs. Thanks again for watching, and good luck this week.